In the spring of 1945, German intelligence officers stared at aerial reconnaissance photographs with growing alarm. Two full American infantry divisions, nearly 40,000 men, were massing along the Rhine River near the town of Viersen. Hundreds of tanks, artillery batteries, supply dumps, command posts with radio antennas reaching into the sky, engineers working day and night constructing pontoon bridges for what appeared to be a massive river crossing. The sounds of diesel engines and clanking treads echoed across the water. Radio intercepts confirmed it. The Americans were preparing for a major assault. German commanders moved panzer divisions to meet the threat. Artillery batteries zeroed in on the American positions. Reserves were repositioned. Every available gun was pointed at this obvious concentration of force. The Wehrmacht was ready. They would make the Americans pay dearly for this crossing. But on the night of March 23, 1945, something impossible happened. The assault came. But it came 10 miles north of where the Germans were waiting. The two divisions they had been watching simply vanished. And in their place, American investigators would later discover something that would remain classified for over 50 years. A battlefield full of deflated rubber, wooden frames, and recording equipment. The 40,000 men did not exist. They never had. What the Germans had been watching for nearly a week was the work of 1,100 artists, designers, and sound engineers who carried paintbrushes instead of rifles, who wielded creativity instead of machine guns, and who waged war with an audacity so brazen it borders on the absurd. They inflated rubber tanks with bicycle pumps. They broadcast the sounds of construction from speakers mounted on trucks. They sent fake radio messages, scripted like theater dialogue. They were soldiers who spent more time mixing paint colors than cleaning weapons. And when German artillery opened fire on their positions, destroying what they thought were American tanks and artillery, these 1,100 men watched their rubber creations tear and deflate, then calmly patched the holes and inflated them again. The Germans never realized they had been shooting at a traveling magic show. This is not a myth. This is not exaggerated folklore. This happened. It was documented, photographed, and studied. And the strangest part? The U.S. Army analyst who reviewed their operations 3 decades later wrote something remarkable. Rarely, if ever, has there been a group of such a few men which had so great an influence on the outcome of a major military campaign. They saved between 15 and 30,000 American lives by convincing the enemy to fight an army that existed only in German imaginations. Tonight, we tell their story. But understand this, for more than 5 decades, we couldn't have. The men who did this were forbidden to speak. They couldn't tell their wives. They couldn't tell their children. Some went to their graves, never revealing what they had done. When they came home from the war, they took off their uniforms, buried them in closets, and locked away the most extraordinary chapter of their lives. General Dwight Eisenhower himself sent them a letter after the war. It thanked them for their service. And then came the postscript. If you tell anyone, I'll see that you hang. He meant it. This is the story of the Ghost Army. It is a story about creativity as a weapon, about art saving lives, about deception so comprehensive that even now, reading the documented evidence, it strains belief. It is a story about 1,100 men who proved that sometimes the best way to win a war is not to fight harder, but to make the enemy fight an army that doesn't exist. And it begins not on the Rhine River in 1945, but in the deserts of Egypt in 1942, where the British were about to pull off one of the greatest cons in military history. Part 1. The Birth of Illusion. To understand how the Ghost Army came to exist, we must travel first not to America, but to the deserts of North Africa. The year is 1942. The place is El Alamein, Egypt. Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery commands the British 8th Army, and he faces a seemingly impossible task. He must attack Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's formidable Afrika Korps, dug in along a defensive line that stretches from the Mediterranean coast to the impassable Qattara Depression. Montgomery has numerical superiority, approximately 150,000 men against Rommel's 100,000. He has tanks and artillery. He has air support. But Rommel is no ordinary commander. The Desert Fox has earned his reputation through tactical brilliance, aggressive counterattacks, and an almost preternatural ability to anticipate enemy movements. If Rommel knows where and when Montgomery will strike, the British advantage evaporates. Montgomery needs surprise. He needs Rommel to look the wrong way, to expect the attack in the wrong place, to prepare for a battle that will never come. And so he turns to an officer named Dudley Clark, who commands a specialized unit with the bland designation of A Force. Clark's specialty is deception, and he has been perfecting his craft for years. Clark proposes Operation Bertram, a deception so elaborate, so comprehensive, that it will require months of preparation and the coordinated efforts of thousands of men. The plan has two primary objectives. First, convince Rommel that the main British attack will come in the south, near the Qattara Depression, where the terrain is more open and seemingly favorable for armored warfare. Second, convince him that the attack will not come until mid-November, nearly 3 weeks after the actual planned date of October 23rd. To achieve this, the British Middle East Command Camouflage Directorate, led by Major Geoffrey Barkas, begins constructing an entirely fictional army. They build more than 1,300 dummy trucks. They create 300 inflatable tanks. They establish fake supply dumps containing 8,000 tons of simulated materials. And then they build something audacious, even by the standards of military deception: a 20-mile-long fake water pipeline made entirely from discarded petrol cans. Mile after mile of what appears to be critical infrastructure, constructed slowly and deliberately, where German reconnaissance can watch its progress. The message the fake pipeline sends is clear: the British are still preparing their logistics. The attack cannot possibly come for weeks. Meanwhile, the real attack is nearly ready. But the deception goes far beyond simply creating fake equipment. The real British armor, the actual divisions that will carry out the northern assault, must be hidden. And so the British employ a brilliant camouflage technique. They cover their tanks with canvas and wooden frames that make them look like ordinary supply trucks from the air. During the day, German reconnaissance flights see nothing unusual, just the routine movement of logistics vehicles. At night, under cover of darkness, the tanks move into their assault positions. Dummy tanks take their place in the rear areas. The real force vanishes, while a phantom force appears. Radio deception plays its role as well. False communications networks broadcast fabricated messages creating the impression of headquarters and divisions that exist only in the electromagnetic spectrum. Wireless operators simulate the distinctive patterns of real radio operators, making German signals intelligence believe that specific units remain in specific locations long after they have departed. The deception succeeds beyond expectations. When Montgomery launches his attack on the night of October 23, 1942, the Germans are completely surprised. Rommel himself is not even present, having returned to Germany for medical treatment. His deputy, General Georg Stumme, believes the attack is still weeks away. When British artillery opens fire along the northern sector, German commanders scramble to understand what is happening. Their intelligence has been systematically deceived. Their reserves are positioned for a southern attack that never comes. The Africa Corps fights bravely, but they are fighting blind, reacting to an offensive they did not expect from a direction they did not anticipate. After the battle, when British forces capture German General Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma, he tells Montgomery something revealing. He had believed the British had at least one more armored division than they actually possessed. He had believed the main attack would come in the south. He had believed everything the deception wanted him to believe. The British had convinced one of Germany's most experienced tank commanders to prepare for a battle that would never come, in a place where it would never happen. When Winston Churchill announces the victory at El Alamein to the House of Commons, he specifically praises the camouflage operation. By a marvelous system of camouflage, Churchill declares, complete tactical surprise was achieved in the desert. The word complete is not an exaggeration. Across the Atlantic, American military planners take notice. Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Ingersoll and Colonel Billy Harris are working in London, preparing for the eventual invasion of Europe. Both men understand that the coming assault on Fortress Europe will be the most dangerous military operation in history. The Germans will have years to fortify the French coast. They will have divisions positioned to counterattack any landing. The Allies will need every possible advantage. Ingersoll is a remarkable figure, a former journalist who had worked as the managing editor of The New Yorker and founded his own newspaper called PM. He has a creative mind, capable of thinking outside the rigid constraints of military doctrine. When he learns about Operation Bertram and the success of British battlefield deception, something clicks. His background in publishing and media, his experience understanding how to shape perceptions, and his time observing British deception efforts converge into what would become the Ghost Army concept. The idea that emerges from his planning sessions with Colonel Billy Harris is radical. A mobile, self-contained deception unit that could stage tactical illusions wherever needed, moving with the advancing armies like a traveling theater troupe. Traditional deception required months of preparation and elaborate coordination with intelligence agencies. But what if you could create a unit with all the necessary equipment and expertise already assembled, ready to deploy anywhere on short notice? Harris, more pragmatic and grounded than the ebullient Ingersoll, helps develop the practical aspects. What would such a unit actually need to function? Visual deception, certainly. Radio deception to create false communications. And something new, something the British hadn't fully developed. Sonic deception, using recorded sounds and powerful speakers. Together, Ingersoll and Harris present their proposal to senior commanders. The idea faces skepticism. Deception seems somehow un-American, not quite honorable. Some officers worry about the reliability of a unit filled with artists and creative types rather than professional soldiers. But the strategic situation is compelling. If such a unit could draw even a single German division away from a critical sector, if it could save even a few hundred American lives, it would be worth the investment. In January 1904, approval comes through. The United States Army will create the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a unit with an authorized strength of 82 officers and 1,023 enlisted men. Its mission will be tactical deception. Its methods will be multimedia. Its existence will be classified top secret. The 23rd will be activated on January 20th, 1944, at Camp Forest, Tennessee. To carry out its mission, the Army brings together 3 existing specialized units and 1 brand new formation. The 603rd Engineer Camouflage Battalion will handle visual deception. The Signal Company Special will manage radio deception. The 3132nd Signal Service Company will specialize in sonic deception. And the 406th Engineer Combat Company will provide security and logistical support. Command of this unusual unit goes to Colonel Harry Reeder, a career officer with experience in engineering and conventional military operations. But the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops is not your typical military unit. It has one of the highest average IQs in the entire United States Army, reportedly around 119. That is because its mission requires not just following orders, but creative problem solving, artistic skill, and the ability to think like a stage designer, a sound engineer, or a con artist. The men who will serve in this unit are not being recruited from ordinary draft boards. They are being sought out in art schools, advertising agencies, design studios, and theater companies. The Ghost Army is being born. But before it can haunt the battlefields of Europe, these artists and engineers must learn to become soldiers. They must learn to work together, to coordinate their different forms of deception into a cohesive whole. And they must learn to do all of this while keeping their true mission completely secret, even from other American units. The training will take place at Camp Forest, and then at Pine Camp in upstate New York, which will later become Fort Drum. There, far from prying eyes, America's masters of military illusion will perfect their craft. And when they sail for England in May 1904, they will carry with them the tools and techniques that will help change the course of the war. And Part 2, the artists and the architects. The recruitment of the Ghost Army represents one of the most unusual military personnel efforts of World War II. Traditional Army recruiting focuses on physical fitness, aptitude for weapons training, and the ability to follow orders under stress. The Ghost Army needs all of that, but they need something else as well: creativity, imagination, and artistic skill. And so the Army begins a quiet campaign to find men who can paint, design, build, and perform. In art schools across the northeastern United States, young men studying painting, sculpture, and design receive draft notices that lead them not to infantry training, but to something far stranger. The recruitment is quiet, almost mysterious. Art students hear rumors about a special unit that needs creative people. The details are vague, but the appeal is clear. serve your country using the skills you've been developing. Arthur Singer, studying wildlife illustration in New York, will eventually join the 603rd Engineer Camouflage Battalion. At age 22, he has no idea he'll one day illustrate the definitive guide to North American birds. Bill Blass, an aspiring fashion designer who had already won a prestigious design award as a teenager, enlists and finds himself assigned to this unit. He cannot know that he will dress first ladies and become one of America's most celebrated designers. Ellsworth Kelly, studying at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, actually requests assignment to the 603rd, specifically because he has heard it recruits artists. The minimalist paintings that will make him one of the 20th century's most important artists are still years away. Right now, he's just a young man who wants to serve. These are not men you would typically find in combat zones, but here's what makes this extraordinary. The U.S. Army is deliberately recruiting them precisely because they're artists. The military is building a unit that will wage war not with superior firepower, but with superior creativity. But in 1943 and early 1944, they are young men in their late teens or early 20s, drafted into a war they must fight, assigned to a unit whose true purpose they do not yet understand. When they arrive at Camp Forest, Tennessee, in early 1944, they begin to grasp the unusual nature of their service. The 603rd Engineer Camouflage Battalion forms the visual deception component of the Ghost Army. Its 379 men make it the largest subunit within the 23rd. These soldiers learn to paint, build, and deploy inflatable military equipment. They study the principles of camouflage, but with a twist. They must learn to camouflage things imperfectly so that enemy reconnaissance can spot them, but not immediately recognize them as decoys. Too good. And the Germans will not see the equipment at all. Too obvious, and they will realize it is fake. The inflatable equipment itself is an engineering marvel. American factories working with the U.S. Rubber Company produce inflatable tanks modeled on the M4 Sherman, the workhorse of American armored divisions. These pneumatic creations weigh only 93 pounds. 4 men can carry what appears to be a 30-ton tank. Deflated, it folds into a compact package that fits in a standard duffel bag. Inflated using gasoline-powered air compressors, it takes shape in approximately 5 minutes. Corporal Arthur Shilstone later recalls a moment that perfectly captures both the absurdity and the danger of this work. He's on guard duty when 2 Frenchmen on bicycles accidentally wander past the perimeter. They stop, staring. But they're not looking at Shilstone. They're looking over his shoulder at 4 American soldiers, picking up what appears to be a 40-ton Sherman tank and turning it around like it's made of cardboard. Shilstone sees their faces register confusion, then something close to awe. He needs to give them an explanation that won't reveal the deception. Finally, he simply tells them, "The Americans are very strong." The Frenchmen nod slowly and bicycle away, apparently convinced they've witnessed American soldiers casually manhandling a tank through sheer physical strength. It's absurd. It's almost comical. And yet, this is the level of deception the Ghost Army must maintain, even with accidental witnesses. The tanks are not the only inflatable equipment. The Ghost Army possesses inflatable jeeps, trucks, artillery pieces, and even reconnaissance aircraft. Each piece is carefully painted by the artists of the 603rd to match real equipment, complete with unit markings, weathering effects, and the kind of wear and tear that actual military vehicles accumulate. When German aircraft conduct reconnaissance flights, or when observers watch through binoculars from distant positions, what they see appears to be genuine American armor and artillery. But visual deception is only one element of the illusion. The Signal Company Special, the unit responsible for radio deception, has perhaps the most technically demanding job in the entire Ghost Army. Radio operators in World War II developed distinctive patterns of Morse code transmission, what radio operators call a fist. Every operator has a slightly different rhythm, timing, and style. Experienced German signals intelligence officers can often identify specific radio operators by their fist alone. The Ghost Army's radio deception men must do something nearly impossible. They must perfectly imitate the fists of actual radio operators from real units. When the 6th Armored Division moves out of a sector, leaving for operations elsewhere, the Ghost Army's radio men must take over the division's communications network, sending false traffic in a way that makes German listeners believe the original division is still present. The operators practice for hours, recording actual transmissions, studying the patterns, and drilling until they can reproduce them convincingly. The fake radio traffic itself must be carefully scripted. It cannot be random chatter. It must reflect the realistic communications of a military unit, logistical requests, situation reports, administrative messages, and the occasional breach of radio discipline that makes the network seem authentically human. Too perfect, and the Germans might suspect deception. The right mix of professional communication and human error creates believability. Then there is the Sonic Deception Unit, the 3132nd Signal Service Company, which represents the most innovative and experimental aspect of the Ghost Army's capabilities. The concept is simple, but the execution extraordinarily complex. Record the sounds of actual military operations, then play them back through powerful speakers to create the auditory illusion of troops, vehicles, and equipment that do not exist. The Sonic Unit trains at the Army Experimental Station at Pine Camp, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Hilton Rayleigh, a fascinating figure who had been a journalist, public relations executive, and the man who convinced Amelia Earhart to fly across the Atlantic. The technical work for sonic deception draws on expertise from Bell Laboratories, the premier research facility in America. Engineers from Bell Labs help develop the equipment and techniques necessary to record, store, and reproduce battlefield sounds with enough fidelity and volume to be convincing. Teams from the 3132nd travel to Fort Knox, Kentucky, where they gain access to actual armored units. With state-of-the-art wire recorders, the predecessors to tape recorders, they capture the sounds of Sherman tanks starting up, idling, moving in formation, shifting gears, and maneuvering across different types of terrain. They record the sounds of half-tracks and trucks. They capture the noises of infantry units on the march, commands being shouted, equipment clattering. They record bridge building operations, the hammering and sawing, and mechanical work that goes into military engineering projects. Back at Pine Camp, they learn to mix these sounds, creating custom audio programs for specific deception scenarios. Want to simulate an armored column moving up at night? Mix together the sounds of multiple tanks? Add the accompanying noise of support vehicles, include some shouted orders and radio chatter, and layer it all with the ambient sounds of a unit on the move. The result? Played through massive 500-pound speakers mounted on modified half-track vehicles, can be heard up to 15 miles away. The speakers themselves are remarkable. They are powerful enough to project sound across miles of battlefield. But they must also be durable enough to survive rough roads, bad weather, and proximity to actual combat. The sonic trucks, as they come to be known, will often operate within a few hundred yards of German positions, broadcasting their illusions into the night. The final component of the Ghost Army is the 406th Engineer Combat Company, led by Captain George Reb. While the other units create illusions, the 406th provides the mundane but essential services that keep the operation running. They provide security, guarding the perimeter when the Ghost Army sets up its deceptions. They handle construction and demolition tasks. They use bulldozers to create fake tank tracks in the ground, adding physical evidence to support the visual deceptions. And they dig artillery positions and foxholes, creating the kind of earthworks that would accompany a real military force. The men of the 406th are trained as infantry soldiers first, engineers second. When the Ghost Army deploys close to the front lines, which they frequently do, the 406th provides the defensive capability necessary to protect the deception teams. They are armed with 50 caliber machine guns, the heaviest weapons the Ghost Army possesses. In a unit full of artists pretending to be soldiers, the 406th consists of actual soldiers who occasionally have to pretend to be other units. Command of this eclectic organization falls to Colonel Harry Reeder, who has the challenging task of turning artists, sound engineers, and radio operators into a functioning military unit. Reeder understands that he cannot lead these men the way he would lead a conventional infantry or armored unit. Many of them chafe at military discipline. They question orders. They propose their own ideas. But they are also intensely dedicated to their mission, perhaps precisely because it appeals to their creative instincts. The officers who serve under Reeder include men like Lieutenant Fred Fox, who will later become a minister and White House staffer, and who writes eloquently about the unit's operations. There is Captain George Reb of the 406th, keeping the more artistic elements of the unit grounded. There are signal officers who understand the intricacies of radio technology, and engineers who can solve the practical problems of deploying inflatable equipment in combat conditions. As the spring of 1944 progresses, the Ghost Army completes its training. The separate units learn to work together, coordinating their visual, sonic, and radio deceptions into comprehensive operations. They practice setting up and breaking down fake headquarters. They rehearse the deployment of inflatable equipment. They run through sonic programs. They practice moving at night, working in blackout conditions, and operating under the pressure of time constraints. By early May 1944, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops is ready. They have their equipment loaded into trucks and crates. They have their plans and procedures. What they do not have is any real understanding of what combat will be like, or whether their elaborate deceptions will actually work when German shells start falling. Theory is one thing. Reality will be something else entirely. The Ghost Army boards ships and sails for England. D-Day is coming, and with it, the beginning of the greatest military campaign in history. The artists are going to war, and they are about to discover whether their illusions can survive contact with the enemy. Part 3. The Tools of Trickery. To truly understand what the Ghost Army accomplished, we must examine in detail the remarkable array of equipment and techniques they employed. This was not simple camouflage or basic deception. This was a multimedia production of astonishing complexity, combining visual, auditory, and electromagnetic elements into a coordinated performance designed to fool one of the most professional and experienced military forces in the world. The inflatable equipment represents the most visible and iconic element of the Ghost Army's arsenal. These pneumatic deceptions were manufactured by the U.S. Rubber Company in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. Workers, including high school students like Teresa Ricard, who earned 49 cents an hour after school, produced these rubber and canvas constructions under conditions of strict secrecy. They were told the inflatables would be used as target practice equipment. The true purpose remained classified. An inflatable M4 Sherman tank consists of a framework of inflatable rubber tubes supporting a rubberized canvas overlay. When deflated, it folds into a package small enough to fit in a standard Army duffel bag. When inflated, which takes approximately 5 minutes, using a gasoline-powered air compressor, it becomes a full-scale replica of a 30-ton tank, complete with hull, turret, gun barrel, and tracks. The entire inflatable weighs just 93 pounds. From a distance of about 400 yards or more, especially when viewed from the air, these inflatable tanks are nearly indistinguishable from real armor. But close inspection would immediately reveal the deception. The canvas moves in the wind. The tracks do not bite into the ground. The gun barrel sags slightly. And so the Ghost Army must protect their deceptions not through perfect realism, but through careful positioning and restriction of access. The artists of the 6th Engineer Camouflage Battalion paint each inflatable tank to match actual military vehicles. They add appropriate unit markings, tactical numbers, and realistic weathering. They know exactly how real tanks look after weeks in the field, where mud accumulates, where paint wears away, what kind of stains and scratches appear on armor plate. They reproduce these details on the inflatables, adding authenticity that helps sell the illusion during aerial reconnaissance. The Ghost Army's arsenal includes many types of inflatables beyond tanks. They have inflatable half-tracks, the versatile armored personnel carriers that can transport infantry or mount weapons. They have inflatable artillery pieces, including 105mm howitzers and larger field guns. They have inflatable jeeps and cargo trucks. They even have inflatable reconnaissance aircraft, L-5 observation planes, that can be positioned at fake airfields to suggest aviation support. Deploying this equipment requires careful planning and coordination. The men of the 603rd must study the actual layout of military units. How do tank companies position their vehicles? What spacing do they use? Where do they locate their command vehicles? How do they arrange their supply trucks and support equipment? The Ghost Army must reproduce these patterns accurately. A fake tank company that does not look like a real tank company will not fool experienced German intelligence officers studying aerial photographs. Camouflage plays a crucial but carefully calibrated role. The Ghost Army does not want to hide their inflatables too well. The whole point is for the Germans to see them, but the deception must not be too obvious either. And so the artists of the 603rd employ what they call imperfect camouflage. They drape camouflage netting over the inflatables, but they leave gaps and openings that reveal the equipment underneath. They position the vehicles in ways that make them partially visible from the air. They create what looks like hurried or careless camouflage work, the kind of thing that might happen when a unit is exhausted or in a hurry. This requires artistic judgment and an understanding of human psychology. Too perfect, and the Germans might not notice the equipment at all, defeating the purpose of the deception. Too sloppy, and they might suspect a trap. The sweet spot lies in creating the appearance of a unit that is trying to hide, but not quite succeeding, which is exactly what real combat units often look like. The visual deception extends beyond inflatable equipment. The Ghost Army employs a range of theatrical techniques to enhance their illusions. They paint fake unit insignias on real trucks and jeeps, creating the appearance of divisions that are not actually present. They hang laundry on clotheslines, a homey detail that suggests troops are bivouacked nearby. They create phony supply dumps, stacking empty crates and covering them with tarps to simulate ammunition or rations. They even construct fake headquarters buildings, complete with radio antennas, flag poles, and the kind of command and control facilities that accompany major units. Special effects teams, under the direction of Lieutenant Fred Fox, develop additional deception techniques. They use pyrotechnics to simulate artillery fire at night, setting off flash canisters that create the visual signature of guns firing. This is coordinated with sonic deception, playing the sounds of artillery, creating a multimedia illusion of batteries that do not exist. They use smoke generators to create the appearance of activity and to obscure certain areas from observation. While visual deception captures the imagination, the sonic deception represents perhaps the Ghost Army's most innovative capability. The 3132nd Signal Service Company operates with equipment that is cutting edge for 1944, technology that would not become common in civilian applications for years to come. The foundation of sonic deception is the library of recorded sounds created during training. Teams recorded dozens of different audio programs at Fort Knox, each designed to simulate a specific type of military operation. There are programs for armored columns on the move, infantry battalions marching, engineering units building bridges, supply convoys arriving, and command posts setting up operations. Each program runs approximately 30 minutes, recorded on 16-inch glass transcription discs, and later transferred to wire recordings. The recordings themselves are remarkably sophisticated. The sound engineers understand that they must capture not just the primary sounds of tanks or trucks, but also the ambient sounds that accompany military operations. The recordings include the sounds of individual soldiers talking, officers giving orders, vehicles starting and stopping, gears shifting, equipment being loaded and unloaded, and all the mechanical and human noises that fill a military operation. When played back, these recordings create a rich audio environment that sounds authentic to listeners on the German side. The playback equipment is equally impressive. The 500-pound speakers, mounted on half-tracks, can project sound up to 15 miles away under ideal conditions. Wind direction, humidity, temperature, and terrain all affect how far and how clearly the sound travels. And so the sonic unit maintains a mobile weather station, tracking meteorological conditions and adjusting their operations accordingly. Operating sonic deception requires careful planning. The trucks must be positioned within range of enemy listening posts, but far enough back to avoid direct observation. The volume and direction of the speakers must be calibrated based on current weather conditions. The timing of the programs must coordinate with other aspects of the deception. And the operators must be prepared to run their programs repeatedly, sometimes for multiple nights in succession, to maintain the illusion of sustained activity. Corporal Victor Dowd, a member of the Sonic Unit, later describes the experience of running a deception program near the front lines. Enormous sounds of tracks racing through the forest, he recalls, sounded like a whole division was amassing. Loudspeakers blaring, sergeants' voices yelling, "Put out that goddamn cigarette now." It was all fakery. It was all a big act. The effect is so convincing that it sometimes produces unintended psychological effects. On at least one documented occasion, an American soldier who knows the sounds are fake reports seeing tanks anyway. His conscious mind understands that what he's hearing is a recording, but his brain, receiving such realistic auditory information, fills in the visual data to match. He literally hallucinates tanks that he knows don't exist, his sensory perception overriding his rational knowledge. If the deception can fool American soldiers who are aware it's happening, what chance do unsuspecting German observers have? Radio deception, managed by the Signal Company Special, represents the most technically demanding element of the Ghost Army's operations. Unlike visual or sonic deceptions, which can be somewhat improvised, radio deception requires precise execution. German signals intelligence is sophisticated and experienced. The Ghost Army must fool not just casual listeners, but trained professionals, analyzing communication patterns, frequencies, and content. The core technique involves the Ghost Army taking over the radio network of an actual division when that division moves out of a sector. The Signal Company Special sets up transmitters and begins broadcasting on the frequencies previously used by the real unit. But they cannot simply send random messages. They must simulate the actual communication patterns of a functioning division headquarters. This requires extensive preparation. The Ghost Army obtains copies of actual message traffic from the unit they will impersonate. They study the communication patterns, how often messages are sent, what types of messages are typical, what security procedures are used, and how the real operators handle their transmissions. Some Ghost Army radio operators become so skilled at imitating specific operators that they can reproduce their distinctive fist, the individual rhythm and timing of Morse code transmission. The content of the messages must be carefully crafted to maintain the illusion. The fake traffic includes routine administrative messages, logistics requests, situation reports, and coordination messages that a real division would send. The messages must be consistent with each other and with the larger fictional narrative of what the fake division is supposedly doing. If the visual deception shows tanks massing on one flank, The radio traffic must reflect preparations for an attack from that position. The Ghost Army also employs what is called special effects, a catch-all term for various additional deception techniques that do not fit neatly into visual, sonic, or radio categories. These include the work of men who pose as officers from other units, wearing the appropriate insignias and patches. Sometimes Ghost Army soldiers venture into nearby towns and villages, deliberately making themselves visible while wearing the markings of divisions that are not actually present in the area. These soldier actors engage in carefully scripted conversations in local cafes and bars, knowing that German intelligence likely has informants listening. They talk loudly about their unit's movements, its strength, its plans. They complain about their officers. They speculate about where they might be sent next. All of it is theater, performed for an audience that does not know it is watching a show. The coordination of all these elements into a single, comprehensive deception operation requires significant planning and practice. A typical Ghost Army operation might involve dozens or even hundreds of inflatable vehicles, multiple sonic trucks running programs on a coordinated schedule, radio nets broadcasting false traffic, and special effects teams creating additional realistic details. All of this must be set up quickly, often under cover of darkness, and must be maintained for days, while the actual operations they are covering take place elsewhere. The logistical challenges are substantial. The Ghost Army must transport all their equipment, often hundreds of miles across damaged French roads. They must find suitable locations for their deceptions, places where the terrain and sight lines make sense for the type of unit they are simulating. They must coordinate with actual military units to ensure their fake operations align with real operational plans. And they must do all of this while maintaining strict secrecy about their true nature and mission. But the greatest challenge, perhaps, is the constant danger. The Ghost Army operates close to the front lines, sometimes within artillery range, occasionally within small arms range. When they succeed in their mission, when they convince the Germans that a major force is present, the enemy responds with artillery fire, bombing runs, and reconnaissance efforts. The Ghost Army's inflatable tanks become targets for German gunners. The sonic trucks, broadcasting their sounds from positions near enemy lines, draw fire, and the men who set up and maintain these deceptions work in the knowledge that their success might be measured by how much enemy attention they attract. 3 Ghost Army soldiers will be killed in action. Dozens more will be wounded, and all of them will operate under the psychological strain of knowing that they are deliberately making themselves targets, drawing enemy fire so that real combat units elsewhere can advance with less opposition. It is a strange kind of courage, this willingness to be shot at, not because you are fighting, but because you are pretending to fight. To Part 4, First Blood. The bulk of the Ghost Army arrives in England in May 1944, just weeks before D-Day. They are based near Stratford-upon-Avon, Shakespeare's hometown, an appropriate location for a unit dedicated to theatrical deception. Here they participate in Operation Fortitude, the massive Allied deception effort designed to convince the Germans that the main invasion will hit the Pas de Calais rather than Normandy. Operation Fortitude is primarily a British operation, managed by intelligence agencies and involving elaborate networks of double agents, fake radio traffic, and visual deceptions, on a strategic scale. The Ghost Army plays a supporting role, using their inflatable equipment to create the appearance of military formations in southeastern England, reinforcing the fiction of a massive army group preparing to cross the Channel at its narrowest point. This is the Ghost Army's introduction to operational deception, and it provides valuable experience. They learn to deploy their equipment in the British countryside. They practice coordinating with actual military units who are part of the fortitude deception. They refine their procedures and discover weaknesses in their techniques. But they are not yet testing their methods against enemy fire, not yet operating in the immediate presence of German forces who might detect and expose their illusions. D-Day arrives on June 6, 1904. The Ghost Army is not part of the initial assault waves. That honor and terrible burden falls to the infantry, paratroopers, and rangers who storm the beaches and establish the first precarious foothold in Fortress Europe. But 2 weeks later, as the Allies expand their beachhead and begin pushing inland, elements of the Ghost Army cross the Channel and arrive in Normandy. Their first missions are relatively simple but important. Some teams deploy near the Mulberry Harbors, the prefabricated ports that the Allies are using to land supplies and reinforcements. At night, they use specialized lighting, what they call Q lighting, to simulate additional harbor facilities. The goal is to draw German artillery away from the real harbors. If the enemy thinks there are multiple port facilities, they might spread their fire among several targets instead of concentrating on the actual harbors. Other teams begin preparing for the Ghost Army's first major tactical deception, which will come in early July. The mission is designated Operation Elephant, and it will be the unit's initiation into the reality of battlefield deception. Operation Elephant takes place from July 1st to 4th, 1944, in the countryside of Normandy. The objective is to simulate an armored division preparing for an offensive. The timing is crucial. Real American forces are planning a major push, and they need the Germans to believe that additional armored forces are massing in a different sector. For the first time, the Ghost Army deploys its full array of deception techniques in proximity to enemy forces. They inflate dozens of rubber tanks and position them in fields and along tree lines. They set up fake command posts with radio antennas. They send false radio traffic, simulating the communications of a division headquarters. They run sonic programs, suggesting the movement and positioning of an armored force. And they take care to create the kind of realistic camp environment that would accompany a real division. Vehicles parked in typical patterns, maintenance areas, even laundry hanging to dry. Operation Elephant is, in many ways, a dress rehearsal. Neither sonic deception nor radio deception is employed to its full extent. The operation is designed as much to test the Ghost Army's procedures as to accomplish a specific tactical goal. And it reveals the challenge that will plague many of their operations: the difficulty of knowing whether their deceptions are actually working. Did the Germans spot the fake tanks? Did they believe what they saw? Did they commit any forces or resources in response to this phantom division? Intelligence reports after the operation suggest some level of success, but the evidence is ambiguous. The Ghost Army will spend much of the war operating without clear feedback about whether their performances are convincing their audience. But Elephant provides crucial experience. The men learn how to deploy under field conditions, how to work efficiently, and how to maintain their deceptions for multiple days. They discover practical problems with their equipment and procedures, and they begin to develop the operational rhythm that will characterize their work for the rest of the war. Arrive in a new sector, gather intelligence about what they are supposed to simulate, rapidly deploy their deception, maintain it for as long as necessary, and then quickly pack up and move to the next mission. After Elephant, the Ghost Army faces a short period of relative quiet as they prepare for their next major operation. Training continues, equipment is maintained and improved, and the men begin to understand that they are part of something unusual and potentially important. They are artists at war, using creativity as a weapon. But they are also soldiers in a combat zone. And combat has a way of making theory meet reality in harsh and unforgiving ways. That harsh reality will come in August, during the siege of the French port city of Brest. It will be the first time the Ghost Army operates in the midst of a major battle. It will be the first time they employ their full array of deception techniques simultaneously. And it will be the first time they experience the terrifying success of a deception so convincing that it draws lethal enemy fire. The American forces attacking Brest are facing a determined German garrison commanded by General Hermann Bernhard Ramke, a tough paratroop officer who has no intention of surrendering. The port is heavily fortified. The Germans have prepared extensive defensive positions. Taking the city will require a difficult and costly siege. General Omar Bradley and General George Patton believe they must take Brest, partly for strategic reasons, partly for psychological reasons. "We must take Brest," Patton quotes Bradley in his diary, "in order to maintain the illusion of the fact that the U.S. Army cannot be beaten." Patton concurs, "Anytime we put our hand to a job, we must finish it." The Ghost Army receives orders to support the siege by creating the illusion of additional forces around the city, particularly armored forces that might intimidate Ramke into surrender, or at least cause him to spread his defenses more thinly. The mission is designated Operation Brest, and it will run from August 20th to 27th, 1944. This operation marks the first time the Ghost Army employs visual, radio, and sonic deception together in the same operation. About 200 men from the 23rd deploy to the Brest area, divided into 3 task forces designated X, Y, and Z. Each task force will simulate a tank battalion supported by artillery. The objective is to make the Germans believe that the American forces besieging the city include significant armor, when in reality the attacking forces are primarily infantry divisions. The Ghost Army sets up their deceptions in sectors held by the 2nd and 29th Infantry Divisions. They inflate approximately 50 dummy tanks and position them in assembly areas that suggest they are preparing for an assault. They establish fake artillery batteries using their flash deception technique, setting off pyrotechnic charges that simulate muzzle flashes, while sonic trucks play the sounds of guns firing. And they broadcast sonic programs suggesting the movement and positioning of armored forces. Corporal Jack Macy, a member of the 603rd from Brooklyn, later recalls that Brest was the biggest piece of action I ever saw in World War II. The Ghost Army finds itself positioned close to the front lines, sometimes only 500 to 600 yards from German positions. The sonic trucks run their programs within range of German artillery. And for the first time, the men of the Ghost Army experience the terrifying effectiveness of their own deceptions when the Germans respond with heavy fire. The deception works, perhaps too well. German spotters observe the Phantom tank battalions and report them to their commanders. German artillery begins shelling the positions where the Ghost Army has placed their inflatable tanks. Some inflatables are damaged or destroyed by shell fragments. The men scramble to repair them, using patch kits to fix the holes and re-inflate the damaged sections. All through the night, as shells explode around them, they work to maintain the illusion. But the operation also reveals the darkest risk inherent in battlefield deception. What happens when coordination fails? Through a miscommunication that will haunt the Ghost Army for the rest of their service, Company D of the 709th Tank Battalion advances into an area where the Ghost Army has successfully drawn German attention. These are real American tankers in real Sherman tanks, and they have no idea they're advancing into a sector where the Germans have concentrated their fire based on the Ghost Army's deception. German artillery opens fire instantly. The response is overwhelming and precise. 5 tanks are destroyed in rapid succession, torn apart by 88mm shells. The crews inside have no chance. Those guys never reached the line of departure, Corporal Jarvie will later recall, his voice heavy with the memory. They just got decimated. The Ghost Army soldiers witness the destruction their deception has caused. They watch real American tanks, real American soldiers die, because the deception worked too well in the wrong place. Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Simonson, the unit's operations officer, writes in his after-action analysis that the incident demonstrates the crucial importance of careful coordination and communication. The clinical military language cannot mask the horror of what happened. The tanks, Simonson notes, should not have attacked in that place, or otherwise the 23rd should have employed deception in another area. It is a lesson written in American blood. Deception is not a game. When you convince the enemy to concentrate their firepower somewhere, you create a killing zone. And if friendly forces enter that zone unknowingly, the deception kills them as surely as if the Ghost Army had fired the guns themselves. This tragedy will change how the Ghost Army coordinates with real combat units for the rest of the war. But it cannot bring back the men of the 709th. Despite this tragedy, Operation Brest demonstrates that the Ghost Army's techniques can work under combat conditions. Post-operation analysis indicates that the sonic deception was effective enough that American engineering units more than a mile away were convinced tanks were assembling nearby. A report states that between 20 and 50 German 88mm anti-tank guns were shifted to meet what the Germans believed was a major armored threat. However, the operation does not achieve its larger objective of compelling Ramek to surrender. The German commander has more troops than Allied intelligence estimated, approximately 38,000 rather than 21,000, and he is determined to hold out. The Americans will not capture Brest until September 19th, after weeks of additional fighting. The consensus among analysts is that while the Ghost Army's deception was well executed, it was thwarted by 2 factors beyond their control. The Germans' lack of effective aerial reconnaissance due to Allied air superiority, which limited their ability to see the full extent of the Phantom force, and Ramke's fierce determination to resist regardless of the apparent odds. Nevertheless, Operation Brest represents a milestone. The Ghost Army has operated under fire. They have employed their full array of techniques. They have proven that their methods can work in combat, and they have learned crucial lessons about coordination, positioning, and the real dangers inherent in their mission. As Simonson later writes, it was a learning experience that readied the deception troops for future operations in the months to come. The Ghost Army has crossed a threshold. They are no longer an experimental unit testing theories. They are a combat unit that has been under fire, that has seen both the power and the peril of their deceptions. And they are about to enter a period of intensive operations as the Allied armies race across France and into the heart of Hitler's Reich. Part 5. Luxembourg and the Line. As summer turns to fall in 1944, the character of the war in Europe begins to shift. The breakout from Normandy has succeeded beyond the Allies' most optimistic projections. General George Patton's Third Army has raced across France, liberating Paris and pushing toward the German border. But this rapid advance creates new problems. Supply lines are stretched thin, units are scattered, and in places the front line becomes dangerously undermanned as divisions spread out to cover large sectors. In mid-September, Patton faces exactly this situation. His Third Army is attacking the fortress city of Metz, a heavily defended strongpoint on the Moselle River. The assault requires concentration of force, pulling divisions from other sectors. This creates a gap, a stretch of more than 25 miles between Metz and Luxembourg City, where the American front line is held by just one squadron of the 43rd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, a small force completely inadequate for the defensive mission. Patton knows the danger. If the Germans realize how thin this sector is, they could launch a counterattack, punching through the weak point and threatening the entire Third Army's flank. But Patton does not have spare divisions to plug the gap. And so he turns to an unconventional solution. He calls for the Ghost Army. The mission is designated Operation Viersen, named after a small commune in Luxembourg, where much of the deception will be staged. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops will simulate the presence of the 6th Armored Division, creating the illusion that approximately 8,000 soldiers and hundreds of tanks are reinforcing this supposedly weak sector. In reality, about 500 Ghost Army soldiers will create this entire Phantom Division. On September 14th, the men of the Ghost Army receive their orders. By noon, they are on alert. By 4 p.m., they are on the road, beginning a 200-mile journey from their bivouac area near Paris to the Luxembourg front. The convoy moves through the night, passing through Chalon-sur-Marne, and arriving in Luxembourg on September 15th, just 5 days after the country has been liberated. As the trucks roll through the towns of southern Luxembourg, crowds line the streets, cheering these American soldiers heading to the front. The people have no idea that hidden under the canvas covers in the trucks are inflatable tanks, radio equipment, and sonic gear. They believe they are watching an armored division moving up to defend their newly liberated country. The deception has begun before the Ghost Army even reaches their staging areas. The soldiers spread out across the sector, deploying their deceptions in multiple locations to create the impression of a division-sized force. They inflate dummy tanks and position them in defensive positions. They set up fake command posts with prominent radio antennas. They paint 6th Armored Division markings on their vehicles and wear the division's shoulder patches. And they begin broadcasting radio traffic, simulating the communications of an armored headquarters. The sonic deception component of Operation Viersen is particularly important. The Germans hold bridgeheads across the Moselle River, including one at Remisch, close enough that German observers can hear sounds from the American side. For 4 consecutive nights, September 16th through 19th, the sonic trucks run their programs, projecting the sounds of tanks moving into position, maintenance operations, and the general activity of an armored force preparing for combat. The effect is powerful. Sergeant Victor Dowd, operating one of the sonic trucks, later describes it. Enormous sounds of tracks racing through the forest sounded like a whole division was amassing. Loudspeakers blaring, sergeants' voices yelling, "Put out that goddamn cigarette now!" It was all fakery. It was all a big act. While the technical deception unfolds, Ghost Army soldiers engage in their special effects role. They venture into Luxembourg City and other nearby towns, wearing 6th Armored Division patches, frequenting cafes and bars, where they talk loudly about their unit's movements and strength. They make themselves conspicuously visible, knowing that German intelligence likely has informants in the area who will report these sightings. Some soldiers have awkward encounters with civilians, or even American officers who knew the real 6th Armored Division when it was actually in Luxembourg weeks earlier. People ask questions about officers they knew, or events they remember. The Ghost Army men have to improvise, giving vague answers, claiming they are new replacements who just joined the division, deflecting inquiries without arousing suspicion. It is a delicate balancing act, maintaining the fiction without creating obvious contradictions. The deception runs for 8 days, an extended period that tests the Ghost Army's ability to maintain their illusion. Each day brings the risk that German reconnaissance will spot something that reveals the fraud. Each night, the sonic trucks must run their programs again, preventing the Germans from realizing that the sounds never correspond to actual movement. The radio operators must continue broadcasting their false traffic, maintaining the fiction of a functioning division headquarters. Operation Viersen achieves its objective. The Germans do not attack through this sector. They do not probe to discover how weak the actual American presence is. Whether because they believe a strong armored force is present, or for other tactical reasons, they maintain a defensive posture. The gap in Patton's line remains secure long enough for actual reinforcements to arrive. Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Simonson will later describe Bettemborg as a turning point. It was our first operation that was executed fully, professionally, and correctly. The Ghost Army has moved beyond experimentation. They are no longer learning on the job. They have become what their creators envisioned, a reliable tactical deception unit capable of supporting major operations at the highest levels. Patton himself, never one for flowery praise, expresses his satisfaction in characteristically blunt terms in a letter to his wife. "There is one rather bad spot in my line," he writes, "but I don't think the Huns know it." Then he adds a line that perfectly captures what the Ghost Army has accomplished. "Hiding it now, by the grace of God and a lot of guts." That lot of guts belongs to 500 men pretending to be 8,000. 500 men with inflatable tanks and sonic trucks holding a 25-mile gap through pure theater. One of America's most aggressive commanders, A general famous for his belief in armored assault and overwhelming force is trusting artists and sound engineers to protect his flank while he attacks a fortress. And it works. As fall deepens into winter, the Ghost Army continues its traveling road show along the front lines. They stage multiple operations, sometimes simulating divisions, sometimes smaller units. Each operation refines their techniques. They learn which deceptions work best in which circumstances. They develop doctrine and procedures, building the knowledge base that will make them increasingly effective. But the greatest test lies ahead. In December 1904, the Germans will launch their last great offensive in the West. The world will come to know it as the Battle of the Bulge, and the Ghost Army will find itself playing a role in one of the most desperate battles of the entire war. Part 6. Winter and the Bulge. Winter arrives in Europe with particular harshness in 1944. The autumn rains give way to freezing temperatures, snow, and fog. For soldiers living in foxholes and fighting across the frozen landscape, it becomes a war of endurance as much as combat. And in mid-December, the Germans launch a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes forest, creating what will become known as the Battle of the Bulge. The German plan is audacious and desperate. 3 German armies, more than 200,000 men, with hundreds of tanks, punch through a lightly defended sector of the American front line. The goal is to split the Allied armies, capture the vital port of Antwerp, and force the Western Allies to negotiate a separate peace. For several days, the offensive succeeds, creating a large bulge in the American lines and threatening disaster. The American response involves rushing reinforcements to critical points, particularly to the town of Bastogne, a vital road junction that the Germans must capture to maintain their offensive momentum. The 101st Airborne Division and other units make a heroic stand at Bastogne, holding the town despite being surrounded. General Patton's Third Army wheels 90 degrees north and drives through terrible weather to relieve the siege. The Ghost Army plays a supporting role in this desperate struggle through Operation Kodak, a radio-only deception designed to confuse German intelligence about American force movements. Unlike most Ghost Army operations, Kodak does not employ visual or sonic deception. Instead, it relies entirely on false radio traffic to create the impression that certain American divisions are located in different positions than they actually are. The operation is designed to support Patton's relief operation. While real divisions move north toward Bastogne, the Ghost Army's radio operators create phantom communications networks suggesting these divisions are elsewhere. The goal is to deceive German intelligence officers analyzing radio traffic, making it harder for them to understand where American forces are concentrating and what their intentions might be. Measuring the success of Operation Kodak is difficult. Radio deception leaves less physical evidence than inflatable tanks or sonic programs. The Ghost Army cannot know for certain whether German intelligence believed their false signals, or whether those beliefs affected German tactical decisions. But the operation demonstrates the versatility of the 23rd. Even when weather or tactical circumstances make visual and sonic deception impractical, they can contribute through electromagnetic deception. The Battle of the Bulge eventually turns in the Allies' favor. The weather clears, allowing Allied air power to devastate German columns. The siege of Bastogne is broken. The German offensive loses momentum and collapses. By late January 1945, the Bulge has been eliminated, and the Allied armies are preparing for the final push into Germany itself. Throughout the winter, the Ghost Army continues its work, staging multiple operations along the shifting front lines. They operate in Luxembourg, in Belgium, and along the German border. Some operations are small, simulating company or battalion-sized elements. Others are major efforts simulating entire divisions. Each mission adds to their experience and to their reputation among commanders who understand what the 23rd can accomplish. The unit develops its own internal culture during these months. The artists continue to sketch and paint, documenting what they see and creating a remarkable visual record of the war. Bill Blass and his friend Robert Tompkins share a dugout at various times, Tompkins keeping his prohibited diary, while Blass begins thinking about what he will do when the war ends. Ellsworth Kelly makes sketches of the French and Belgian countryside that will later influence his paintings. The men form friendships, bound together by the unusual nature of their shared mission. But the winter also brings losses. Ghost Army soldiers are wounded by artillery fire during operations. The constant proximity to danger, the knowledge that their success might be measured by how much enemy fire they draw, creates psychological stress. And always there is the burden of secrecy, the inability to tell anyone, even other American soldiers, what they actually do. As winter turns toward spring, the war enters its final phase. The Allied armies are poised to cross the last great natural barrier between them and the heart of Germany, the Rhine River. The Rhine has been Germany's moat, protecting the heartland from invasion for more than 2,000 years. Crossing it will require careful planning, massive preparation, and if possible, some deception to confuse the Germans about where and when the attack will come. The Ghost Army has one more great performance to stage, one final masterpiece of military deception that will be the culmination of everything they have learned, everything they have practiced, everything they can do. It will be called Operation Viersen, and it will be their finest hour. On Part 7, Operation Viersen, the masterpiece. By March 1945, the strategic situation in Northwest Europe has been transformed. The Allied armies have pushed the Germans back across France, Belgium, and Luxembourg. They have liberated these countries and now stand on the western bank of the Rhine River, looking across into Germany itself. The Rhine is the last major obstacle before the industrial heartland of the Ruhr and the road to Berlin. Crossing it will mark the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. The United States Ninth Army, under the command of General William Simpson, has the mission of forcing a major crossing of the Rhine. But the Germans know the river is their last strong defensive position. They have concentrated forces along the eastern bank, prepared artillery batteries, and positioned reserves to counterattack any crossing attempt. A frontal assault against a prepared defense could be extraordinarily costly in American lives. General Simpson and his staff need every advantage they can get. They need surprise. They need the Germans looking the wrong way, expecting the attack somewhere other than where it will actually come. And so they turn to the Ghost Army for what will be the unit's largest, most complex, and most successful operation of the entire war. The plan for Operation Viersen is conceived by Lieutenant Colonel Merrick Truly, the 23rd's liaison officer attached to the 9th Army's operations section, truly understands both the capabilities of the Ghost Army and the requirements of the Rhine crossing. He designs an operation that will employ every technique the 23rd has developed, coordinated into a comprehensive deception that will draw German attention away from the actual crossing point. The real crossing will be made by the 16th Corps in the 9th Army's northern sector, a crossing zone that offers good terrain and tactical advantages. To hide this, the Ghost Army will simulate a major buildup by 2 full divisions, the 30th and 79th Infantry Divisions, in the 13th Corps sector, about 10 miles south of the real crossing area. The deception will suggest that this is where the 9th Army intends to cross. The scope of Operation Viersen is unprecedented for the Ghost Army. They will deploy more than 600 inflatable vehicles, the largest array of dummy equipment they have ever used. They will position these inflatables east and west of the town of Viersen, creating what from the air will look like 2 complete divisions preparing for a river crossing. Each notional division will have nearly 100 rubber vehicles, including 5 inflatable L-5 liaison planes positioned on fake landing strips. The visual deception begins on March 18th. Under cover of darkness, teams from the 603rd Engineer Camouflage Battalion inflate hundreds of tanks, trucks, artillery pieces, and other vehicles. They position them in realistic layouts, creating the kind of assembly areas that would precede a major assault. They construct fake supply dumps. They establish phony command posts with radio antennas. They use bulldozers to create fake vehicle tracks in the mud, adding physical evidence to support the visual deception. By dawn on March 19th, when German aerial reconnaissance flies over the 13th Corps sector, they see exactly what the Ghost Army wants them to see. 2 powerful infantry divisions with full supporting armor and artillery, clearly preparing for a river crossing. Aerial photographs taken by the Germans will later be captured by advancing American forces, confirming that the deception was photographically convincing. The sonic component of Operation Viersen is equally elaborate. The sonic trucks operate multiple times each night for nearly a week. During the nighttime hours, when sound carries best, they project the noises of pontoon bridge construction, heavy engineering equipment, and the movement of troops and vehicles. The sounds suggest extensive preparation for a crossing, the kind of logistical work that would take days to complete and would precede an assault. In the daytime, the sonic trucks play different programs, simulating the sounds of ongoing construction and activity. The sound of hammering, sawing, welding, and mechanical work fills the air. German observers on the eastern bank of the Rhine hear what sounds like extensive bridging operations, suggesting the Americans are building the infrastructure necessary for a major crossing at this location. The Ghost Army enhances the sonic deception with a clever addition. Real engineering units are attached to the 23rd for this operation, and they actually assemble some genuine bridge sections near the river. These real bridge components, visible to German observers, add credibility to the sonic deception. The Germans can see bridge building equipment and hear the sounds of bridge construction, reinforcing the impression that a crossing is being prepared at this location. Special effects teams add another layer of deception. At night, they set off flash canisters that simulate artillery fire, coordinated with sonic programs playing the sounds of guns. This suggests that American artillery battalions are conducting ranging shots and preparing fire support for the crossing. The Germans respond with their own artillery, shelling the positions where they believe American guns are located. But they are firing at nothing, wasting ammunition on phantom batteries. The radio deception for Operation Viersen is the most sophisticated the Ghost Army has ever attempted. The signal company Special sets up multiple false radio networks, simulating not just the communications of two infantry divisions, but also the coordinating headquarters, supporting units, and all the complex radio traffic that accompanies a major military operation. The fake messages discuss logistics, coordinates, timings, and all the details that would be expected if an actual assault were being planned. Some of the fake radio traffic is deliberately less secure than it should be, as if harried signal officers are taking shortcuts under pressure. This calculated indiscretion makes the deception more believable. The Germans, listening to this traffic and analyzing its content, have no reason to suspect it is fiction. Everything they hear is consistent with a major crossing operation being prepared in the 14th Corps sector. The coordination required for Operation Viersen is extraordinary. The Ghost Army must synchronize visual, sonic, and radio deceptions across a wide area and over multiple days. They must coordinate with real 9th Army units to ensure the deception aligns with the overall operational plan. They must maintain their elaborate fiction continuously, never allowing the illusion to crack or reveal inconsistencies. And they must do all of this while close to the front lines, under German observation, occasionally under German artillery fire. When their rubber tanks are spotted by German artillery observers and shells begin falling, the men must rush to repair damaged inflatables, patching holes and re-inflating the damaged sections so that the next reconnaissance flight sees intact equipment. On March 23rd, the real crossing begins. But it happens not in the 13th Corps sector, where the Ghost Army has staged their elaborate show, but 10 miles north, where the actual 16th Corps assault forces have quietly moved into position under cover of darkness. The Germans are caught completely off guard. The 30th and 79th Infantry Divisions, the units the Ghost Army has been simulating, cross the Rhine and meet surprisingly light resistance. American casualties are remarkably low for such a dangerous operation. Something has worked. But the Ghost Army won't know how well until intelligence officers begin examining captured German documents. The evidence, when it comes, is damning for the Germans and triumphant for the Ghost Army. American forces capture a German order of battle map created just hours before the actual assault. The map shows the 79th Infantry Division positioned approximately where the Ghost Army portrayed it. The 30th Division doesn't appear on German maps at all. German intelligence has completely lost track of an entire division. Post-operation reports confirm that German commanders expected the main Allied effort to be made north of Wesel, with a minor crossing near Krefeld, exactly where the Ghost Army staged their deception. The Germans moved reserves to defend against an attack that would never come, leaving the actual crossing point vulnerable. The Ghost Army has pulled off the perfect magic trick. They made 40,000 men appear where none existed and made 30,000 real men vanish from enemy intelligence maps. The Germans defended against ghosts, while the real army crossed unmolested. General Simpson, commander of the 9th Army, commends the Ghost Army for their contribution. The 30th Division's intelligence officer reports that the American attack came as a complete surprise to the enemy, with a consequent saving of American lives. The 79th Division's intelligence officer captures a German order of battle map that confirms the effectiveness of the deception. A United States Army analyst, studying the missions of the Ghost Army 30 years after the war, when their operations were still classified, writes what may be the most important assessment of their work. Rarely, if ever, has there been a group of such a few men which had so great an influence on the outcome of a major military campaign. Operation Viersen is the Ghost Army's last major deception of the war. It is also their most successful, their most elaborate, and in many ways, their most important. 1,100 men simulated 40,000, drew German forces away from a critical crossing point, and helped enable one of the final Allied victories in Europe. They did it with rubber tanks, recorded sounds, and fake radio signals. They did it with imagination, creativity, and the absolute conviction required to sell a lie on such a massive scale. In the history of military deception, Operation Viersen stands as a masterwork, a perfect example of how creativity and technical innovation can achieve strategic effects. The Ghost Army has proven beyond any doubt that their methods work, that deception can save lives, and that sometimes the best weapon is not the one that kills, but the one that misleads. Within weeks, Germany will surrender. The war in Europe will end, and the men of the Ghost Army will pack up their inflatable tanks, their sonic trucks, and their radio equipment, preparing to return home. But they will not return as heroes celebrated for their achievements. They will return in silence, carrying a secret they are forbidden to tell. Part 8. The daily life of deception. Between operations, during the periods of planning and preparation, moving and maintaining equipment, the men of the Ghost Army live a life that is simultaneously ordinary and extraordinary. They are soldiers in a combat zone, subject to military discipline, living under field conditions, eating army rations. But they are also artists, performers, and technicians engaged in work unlike anything else in the military. The routine begins each morning in whatever location the unit currently occupies. This might be a French field, a Belgian town, a Luxembourg village, or a position in Germany itself. The men sleep in tents, or sometimes in commandeered buildings. They wake to the same military schedule as any other army unit. Reveille, formation, breakfast from field kitchens. But then, their day diverges from conventional military life. Instead of weapons training and tactical exercises, they work on inflatable tanks, testing the inflation mechanisms, patching holes, touching up paint. The artists among them treat this like any other professional work, approaching their rubber canvases with the same care they would give to actual art. Each tank must look authentic. Each detail matters. Sloppy work could expose the deception and cost lives. The sonic unit maintains their equipment with equal care. The wire recorders and phonograph players require constant attention. The massive speakers must be inspected for damage. New sound programs are sometimes created, mixing existing recordings into new combinations to match the requirements of upcoming operations. The technical expertise required is considerable. These are not just soldiers playing recordings. They are audio engineers working with cutting-edge technology. Radio operators spend hours practicing their craft. They study actual radio logs from real units, learning the patterns and rhythms of military communications. They practice imitating the distinctive fist of specific operators, drilling until they can reproduce someone else's Morse code style convincingly. This is meticulous work requiring intense concentration. Between operations, when there is time, the artistic nature of the unit expresses itself in ways beyond the requirements of deception. Many men keep sketchbooks, drawing, and painting the scenes around them. The landscapes of France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, the architecture of villages and towns, the faces of civilians and fellow soldiers, all become subjects for art. Bill Blass, who will become one of America's most celebrated fashion designers, sketches constantly. His friend Robert Tompkins keeps a prohibited diary, a small notebook just 2 inches by 3 inches, hidden in his pocket and written in tiny script. Tompkins' diary entries provide a fascinating window into daily life. Last night moved up about 1.5 miles and pulled into heavy woods about 3 o'clock, he writes on September 16, 1944, during Operation Viersen. Woke early, sewed on patches, set up tanks, built fires simulating armored infantry battalion. Truck goes out every hour into village on atmosphere. That last phrase, on atmosphere, captures something essential about the Ghost Army's work. They are not just creating physical deceptions, they are creating atmosphere, the feeling and appearance of a military presence. The trucks driving through villages, the men wearing particular unit patches, and frequenting local cafes, the casual conversations that might be overheard by informants. All of this is theater, performance art with life and death stakes. Ellsworth Kelly, future giant of minimalist art, makes watercolor sketches of French villages, studies of architecture and landscape that will later influence his aesthetic sensibility. Arthur Singer, who will become famous for his bird illustrations, draws whenever possible. Art Kane, future photographer, does not yet have his camera, but observes everything with the eye that will later capture some of the most iconic images in American photography. The artistic culture within the Ghost Army creates a unique military unit. These men are not traditional soldiers. Many chafe at military discipline and hierarchy. They question orders, propose alternatives, and generally behave in ways that would be problematic in conventional units. But they are intensely dedicated to their mission, perhaps precisely because it appeals to their creative instincts. Deception is a form of art, and they are artists. Officers like Colonel Reeder must manage this unusual group with a lighter touch than would be used with regular troops. Direct orders work less well than explanation and persuasion. The men need to understand why they are being asked to do something, how it fits into the larger mission. When they grasp the purpose, they become incredibly industrious and innovative. They propose improvements, develop new techniques, and solve problems through creative thinking. The social dynamics within the unit reflect this artistic culture. Friendships form based on shared interests rather than just military camaraderie. Artists from New York find each other and form small circles, discussing art and design while surrounded by war. Men from different backgrounds discover common interests in music, literature, or theater. The unit becomes something like an art school or creative workshop that happens to be located in a combat zone. But this is not all camaraderie and creative expression. There is also fear. The Ghost Army operates close to danger. They are frequently within range of enemy artillery. They work knowing that their success might be measured by how much enemy fire they attract. And when shells start falling, when German artillery finds their positions, the rubber tanks offer no protection. The men must take cover and hope the Germans waste enough shells on fake targets before realizing the deception. There are close calls. Men diving for cover as shells whistle overhead. Fragments tearing through inflatable tanks, forcing frantic repairs while under fire. The sonic trucks positioned forward to project their sounds toward German lines make particularly vulnerable targets. The men who operate them must stay with their equipment, running their programs even as artillery fire searches for them. 3 Ghost Army soldiers are killed during the war. Private First Class Gertrude Jane Steck dies in an accident. Private Harold Flynn and Private William Frederick Urquhart are killed in action. Dozens more are wounded, some seriously. These casualties, though lower than what combat infantry units suffer, are a constant reminder that the Ghost Army's work is dangerous despite its theatrical nature. The psychological burden of deception adds another layer of stress. These men are deliberately deceiving their enemies, drawing fire onto themselves, and sometimes onto other units who do not know they are part of a deception. When things go wrong, as happened at Brest with the 709th Tank Battalion, the Ghost Army men feel responsible. They have created a situation that led to deaths. The fact that miscommunication caused the tragedy does not entirely relieve the sense of guilt. There is also the isolation that comes from secrecy. The Ghost Army cannot tell other American units what they do. When they operate in a sector, the real combat units nearby do not know that some of the tanks they see are inflatable, that some of the sounds they hear are recordings, that the radio traffic includes fiction. This secrecy is necessary for operational security, but creates a barrier between the Ghost Army and other soldiers. After operations, when the Ghost Army packs up their equipment and moves on, they leave behind no record of what they have done. The real units who move into the sector after them never know that the Ghost Army was there. There are no medals for successful deceptions, no public recognition, no official acknowledgement. The Ghost Army soldiers must take satisfaction from the knowledge that they are doing important work, even if no one can know about it. Meals provide routine and structure. The 406th Engineer Combat Company includes cooks who become skilled at preparing Army rations in ways that make them more palatable. Sometimes they get turkey for Thanksgiving or Christmas, a special treat that brings some comfort. Other times they eat the standard Army fare, K rations, C rations, whatever the supply system provides. The food is rarely good, but it is fuel, keeping them going. Entertainment when available comes from Armed Forces Radio, occasional movies shown on portable projectors, and whatever the men create themselves. Some write letters home, though they must be careful not to reveal anything about their actual work. They write about the weather, about the French countryside, about missing home, but they cannot write about inflatable tanks or sonic deception. Their families receive letters from soldiers who seem to be doing something in the army but cannot explain what. Occasionally, there are passes to nearby cities, opportunities to visit Paris or Brussels or Luxembourg City for a brief respite from military life. The men enjoy these breaks, exploring cities that are celebrating liberation, experiencing culture and civilization after weeks or months in the field. But even on pass, they must maintain their cover, pretending to be ordinary soldiers from conventional units. As the months pass, the Ghost Army develops a collective identity. They understand that they are part of something unusual and important. They take pride in their work, even though they cannot discuss it publicly. They have learned that creativity can be a weapon, that art can save lives, and that deception done well is a form of military excellence. This pride will sustain them when the war ends and they return home, forbidden to speak about what they did. For decades, they will carry this secret, this knowledge that they contributed something unique to the war effort. And when the truth finally emerges, when their operations are declassified and their story can be told, some will express surprise that anyone cares about what they did. They did their jobs. They served their country. That, in their minds, was enough. But what they accomplished was extraordinary. And the daily life they lived, this strange combination of artistic practice and military mission, of creativity and danger, deserves to be understood and remembered. Chapter Part 9, Victory and Silence. Spring 1945 brings the collapse of Nazi Germany. The Allied armies close in from west and east. The Rhine crossings have succeeded. American and British forces drive deep into Germany, while Soviet forces approach Berlin from the opposite direction. The outcome is no longer in doubt. Germany will surrender. The war in Europe is ending. The Ghost Army conducts a few more operations in these final weeks, but their mission is essentially complete. Operation Viersen was their last major deception. As German forces collapse and retreat, there is less need for elaborate tactical deceptions. The war has become a pursuit, a race to capture territory and enemy units before they can escape or reorganize. When Germany surrenders on May 8, 1945, the men of the Ghost Army celebrate with soldiers across Europe. Victory in Europe has been achieved. The long, brutal war that began with Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939 is over in the European theater. But for the Ghost Army, as for all American servicemen in Europe, there is uncertainty about what comes next. Initially, there is concern that the Ghost Army might be sent to the Pacific. The war against Japan continues. Plans are being developed for the invasion of the Japanese home islands, an operation that will require every available soldier and could result in hundreds of thousands of American casualties. Some Ghost Army personnel expect they will be redeployed to participate in this final campaign. The unit returns to France and prepares for potential shipment to the Pacific. But before those orders can be executed, the atomic bombs fall on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrenders on August 15, 1945. World War II is over. The Ghost Army's mission has ended. The question becomes what to do with this unusual unit and their extraordinary equipment. In September 1945, near Remagen in Germany, the Ghost Army holds what amounts to a bonfire. They burn the inflatable tanks, the dummy artillery, the rubber aircraft. Years of work, hundreds of deceptions, all the physical evidence of their operations goes up in smoke. The Army does not want this equipment and these techniques to become publicly known. The technology and methods might be useful in future conflicts, and secrecy remains paramount. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops is officially deactivated on September 15, 1945. The men receive their discharge papers and prepare to return home. But before they leave, they receive a letter that will define the rest of their lives. The letter comes from Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower. It thanks them for their service and acknowledges their contribution to the Allied victory. But then comes a postscript that is both remarkable and ominous. "If you tell anyone," the letter warns, "I'll see that you hang." This is not a joke. This is an order backed by the full weight of military law and national security classification. The Ghost Army's existence, their operations, their techniques, all of this is classified top secret. The men are sworn to secrecy. They are ordered not to discuss their service with anyone, not even their families. The oath they take is binding not just during wartime, but indefinitely. The secret must be kept. And so the men of the Ghost Army return to civilian life, carrying a burden that many World War II veterans share, but in a particularly acute form. They cannot talk about what they did. They cannot process their experiences by sharing stories. They cannot take pride in their accomplishments by telling others. They must simply bury their service and move forward. Many return to the creative careers they had interrupted to go to war. Bill Blass returns to New York and begins his ascent to becoming one of America's most celebrated fashion designers. Years later, when he's dressing first ladies and movie stars, creating collections that define American fashion, interviewers will occasionally ask about his war service. He mentions serving in Europe but offers few details, bound by his oath until declassification decades later. His wartime experience creating deceptions, thinking visually about how to fool observers from different angles and distances, shapes his understanding of how clothing appears to different viewers. Fashion, in its way, is also about creating illusions, about making people see what the designer wants them to see. Ellsworth Kelly returns to his art studies in Boston and then moves to Paris on the GI Bill. In France, he will develop his distinctive style of hard-edge abstraction, creating paintings and sculptures that reduce form to its essence. Art historians will later note how his time in the Ghost Army, thinking constantly about visual perception and how observers process what they see, may have informed his artistic development. Creating camouflage means understanding how the human eye reads shapes, colors, and patterns. Kelly spent his formative years as an artist studying exactly these questions while the stakes were life and death. That intensity of purpose, that absolute need to understand visual perception at its most fundamental level, transfers to his art. His paintings eliminate everything except pure form and color, asking viewers to see without the filters of representation or symbolism. Perhaps this is what war taught him, that the essential truth of seeing matters more than decoration. Art Kane becomes one of the most famous photographers in America. His 1958 photograph of 57 jazz musicians gathered on a Harlem street, known as A Great Day in Harlem, becomes one of the most iconic images in American cultural history. The photograph requires organization, staging, and the ability to coordinate dozens of famous temperamental personalities into a single, coherent image. These are skills Kane developed in the Ghost Army, where staging convincing scenes was a matter of military necessity. His later work in fashion photography, advertising, editorial photography demonstrates a master's understanding of how to construct images that communicate specific messages to viewers. The Ghost Army taught him that images are not just captured, they are built, constructed, designed with intention. Arthur Singer illustrates field guides, most notably contributing to the Birds of North America guide that becomes the standard reference for generations of birdwatchers. His precise, detailed illustrations reflect the observational skills he developed as an artist at war. In the Ghost Army, sloppy work could expose a deception and cost lives. Singer learned to observe carefully, to render details accurately, to make his art serve a purpose beyond mere aesthetics. These habits transfer to his civilian work. His bird illustrations are scientifically accurate while remaining aesthetically beautiful, achieving the difficult balance between art and documentation. Jack Macy, who later speaks openly about his Ghost Army service after declassification, goes on to a distinguished career in exhibition design. He designs the Ellis Island Immigration Museum and works on the National World War II Museum. His understanding of how to create immersive experiences, how to tell stories through visual and spatial design, connects directly to his Ghost Army work. An exhibition, like a deception, must make visitors believe something, must transport them mentally to another place and time. The Ghost Army taught Macy how to create convincing environments using limited resources, how to guide people's attention, and how to make them see what you want them to see. These same skills, applied to museum design, help millions of visitors understand history. But not all Ghost Army veterans become famous. Most return to ordinary lives, working as teachers, engineers, designers, illustrators, architects. They form professional networks, reconnect with old Ghost Army comrades, and occasionally meet for quiet reunions where they can discuss their shared secret away from outsiders. Before declassification, these reunions must have been strange affairs. Men gathering to reminisce about experiences they still cannot fully discuss, speaking in code about operations that remain classified, careful not to reveal too much even among themselves. Some write letters to each other, maintaining friendships forged in France and Luxembourg and Germany. The letters must dance around direct references to their work, using euphemisms and vague language that would mean nothing to censors or family members who might read them. They write about the old times and our work in Europe without ever quite saying what that work was. The frustration of having shared something extraordinary and being unable to talk about it must have been immense. But the silence is difficult. Veterans of conventional military units can attend reunions, join veterans organizations, share their stories with family and friends. Ghost Army veterans cannot. They have no official unit history because the unit officially does not exist. They have no medals for their deceptive operations. They have no public recognition. The wives, children, and families of Ghost Army veterans grow up not knowing what their husbands and fathers did in the war. When asked, the veterans give vague answers or deflect questions. I was in Europe. I worked with engineers. I did some communications work. The specifics remain hidden. Some families assume their fathers or husbands are not talking because they experience trauma they cannot discuss. Others simply accept that World War II veterans often do not want to talk about their experiences. Kim Seal's story captures the heartbreaking reality of this enforced silence. His father served in the Ghost Army and survived the war. He came home, raised a family, lived to age 84. He died in 2001, taking his secret with him. Kim never knew. His father never told him. 6 months after the funeral, Kim receives a phone call from someone organizing a Ghost Army reunion. The caller asks if he's the son of the Ghost Army veteran. Kim's response is immediate and confused. "What do you mean, Ghost Army?" His father had carried this secret for more than 50 years. He had gone to his grave without ever telling his own son about the most extraordinary thing he had ever done. "My dad never talked about it," Kim will later say, his voice carrying the weight of discovery and loss mixed together. He learned what his father accomplished only after it was too late to ask him about it, too late to tell him he was proud, too late to understand. This story repeats across hundreds of families. Men die, their children clean out their houses, and only then do they find hints. Old photographs that make no sense, unit patches they've never seen, cryptic diary entries that reference places and operations that don't appear in any official records. Some families learn the truth when researchers track them down decades later. Others never learn at all. The wives who lived with these men for 50 years without knowing what they had done. The children who thought their fathers had unremarkable military service. The grandchildren who never heard the stories because their grandfathers were forbidden to tell them. All of them robbed of something precious by the necessary but cruel machinery of classification and secrecy. The classification persists because the Cold War creates new demands for military deception. The techniques developed by the Ghost Army remain relevant. The technology improves. Tape recorders replace wire recorders. Better inflatable materials become available. But the fundamental principles remain valid. The United States military continues to employ tactical deception in conflicts around the world. And the secrecy surrounding these operations requires that the Ghost Army precedent remain classified. In 1985, a break in the secrecy occurs. The Smithsonian Magazine publishes an article about the Ghost Army, the first major public disclosure of their story. The article creates interest, but does not lead to declassification of official records. The Army acknowledges that such a unit existed, but provides few details. During the 1980s, the Army begins quietly reaching out to former Ghost Army soldiers, inviting them to the Pentagon for briefings about their own operations. The military has rediscovered the Ghost Army and recognized its historical importance. Analysts study the operations and their effectiveness. The Ghost Army becomes a case study in successful military deception, but the official records remain classified. Finally, in 1996, 51 years after the end of World War II, the Army declassifies the Ghost Army records. The official history of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, written in 1945 by Captain Fred Fox, becomes available to researchers. Operation reports, intelligence assessments, and documentation of individual missions are released. After more than half a century, the truth can be told. But declassification comes too late for many Ghost Army veterans. By 1996, hundreds have died, taking their stories with them. Their families learn, only after their deaths, what these men accomplished during the war. The children of Ghost Army veterans discover that their fathers were part of something remarkable, something that saved thousands of lives, something that helped win the war. And they discover it only after their fathers are gone. The survivors, now in their 70s and 80s, finally have permission to talk about their service. Some give interviews, some write memoirs, or contribute to oral history projects. They describe what they did, how the deceptions worked, what it felt like to operate so close to danger while creating illusions. After decades of silence, the stories finally emerge. And what emerges is remarkable. The Ghost Army's operations saved an estimated 15,000 to 30,000 American lives. Their deceptions contributed to successful operations at every stage of the campaign, from Normandy to the Rhine. They pioneered techniques that influence modern military doctrine. And they proved that creativity, imagination, and artistic skill can be powerful weapons in warfare. But recognition remains incomplete. The men receive no medals specifically for their Ghost Army service. Their unit has no official place in military lineage. They are not celebrated alongside other famous World War II units. They remain, to a large extent, what they were during the war: ghosts. Part 10. Recognition and Legacy. The declassification of Ghost Army records in 1996 opens the door to recognition, but recognition does not come automatically. It requires the efforts of families, historians, and advocates who believe these men and their achievements deserve acknowledgement. And it requires years of patient work to educate the public and petition the government. Rick Beyer, a filmmaker and historian, becomes one of the most important advocates for the Ghost Army. After learning about the unit from various sources, Beyer becomes fascinated by their story. He begins interviewing surviving veterans, collecting documents, and piecing together the full scope of what the 23rd accomplished. What he discovers convinces him that the Ghost Army deserves not just historical documentation, but official recognition. In 2013, Beyer releases a documentary film titled The Ghost Army, which airs on PBS. The documentary brings the story to a wide audience for the first time. It includes interviews with surviving veterans, examination of their artwork and documents, and analysis of their operations. The film is critically acclaimed and introduces millions of Americans to a unit they never knew existed. Beyer also co-authors a book with Elizabeth Sales, daughter of Ghost Army veteran William Sales, The Ghost Army of World War II. The book combines historical analysis with visual documentation, including sketches, paintings, and photographs created by the Ghost Army soldiers themselves. It becomes a best-selling account of one of the most unusual units in American military history, but Beyer and others involved in researching the Ghost Army come to believe that something more is needed. These men deserve formal recognition from the nation they served. And so begins a campaign for the Ghost Army to receive the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor that Congress can bestow. The Congressional Gold Medal has been awarded fewer than 200 times in American history. Recipients include George Washington, the Wright brothers, Rosa Parks, the Tuskegee Airmen, and the Navajo Code Talkers. It is reserved for individuals or groups who have made exceptionally significant contributions to the nation. The campaign to secure this honor for the Ghost Army will take nearly a decade of effort. Representative Ann McLean Custer of New Hampshire becomes the first congressional sponsor of legislation to award the medal to the Ghost Army. Custer, whose father was a World War II veteran, is recruited to the cause by Rick Beyer, with whom she attended college. She introduces legislation in the House of Representatives, while Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts sponsors companion legislation in the Senate. The legislative process is complex and time-consuming. Congressional gold medals require supermajority support in both houses of Congress. The Ghost Army advocates must convince dozens of representatives and senators to co-sponsor the legislation. They must educate congressional offices about who the Ghost Army was and what they accomplished. They must counter bureaucratic resistance and answer questions about why this particular unit deserves such recognition. Progress is slow but steady. More co-sponsors sign on as they learn about the Ghost Army. The legislation gains bipartisan support, unusual in an era of political polarization. The story of creative soldiers who saved lives by using deception appeals across political lines. No one opposes honoring these veterans, but getting the necessary supermajority support requires persistent lobbying. Roy Eichhorn, whose stepfather George Martin served in the Ghost Army, becomes another key advocate. Eichhorn, a graduate of Beloit College who studied anthropology, has been researching the Ghost Army since the 1970s, long before declassification. His personal connection to a Ghost Army veteran and his academic training and research make him uniquely positioned to document and advocate for the unit. He works closely with Beyer and the nonprofit Ghost Army Legacy Project to build support for the Congressional Gold Medal. The legislation faces various procedural hurdles. It must pass through committee. It must be scheduled for votes. It must navigate the complexities of congressional procedure. And all of this takes time, years during which more Ghost Army veterans die. The advocates racing to secure recognition before all the veterans pass away. Finally, on February 1st, 2022, President Joe Biden signs Public Law 11785, the Ghost Army Congressional Gold Medal Act. After nearly 8 years of effort, the legislation has passed Congress and been signed into law. The Ghost Army will receive the Congressional Gold Medal. But passing the law is only the beginning. A medal must be designed. A ceremony must be planned. And another 2 years pass before everything is ready. During this time, more Ghost Army veterans die. By 2024, only 7 of the original 1,100 men are still alive. On March 21st, 2024, the ceremony finally takes place. The location is Emancipation Hall in the United States Capitol Visitor Center, a solemn and historically significant space beneath the Capitol Dome. The Statue of Freedom stands in the background, providing an appropriate backdrop for honoring men who helped preserve freedom in Europe 8 decades earlier. 3 surviving Ghost Army veterans attend the ceremony. Bernard Bluestein, 100 years old, traveled from Illinois. Seymour Nussenbaum, 100 years old, came from New Jersey. John Chrisman, 99 years old, made the journey from New Jersey as well. These 3 men, all centenarians, represent the 1,100 who served. They receive the medal on behalf of their fallen comrades, the men who kept the secret for 50 years and have now passed into history. The ceremony is emotional and moving. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson presides, reading from the 1945 Army report that assessed the Ghost Army's impact. Rarely, if ever, has there been a group of a few men which had so great an influence on the outcome of a major military campaign. Secretary of the Army Christine Wormuth speaks about how the Ghost Army's techniques continue to influence modern military operations. Various senators and representatives who sponsored or supported the legislation offer remarks. Hundreds of family members attend, descendants of Ghost Army veterans who never knew about their father's or grandfather's service until after they died. For these families, the ceremony represents a bittersweet moment. Their loved ones are finally being honored, but most of them did not live to see this recognition. The secret they were forced to keep for so long is now being celebrated, but they are not here to accept the honor. The Congressional Gold Medal itself has been specially designed for the Ghost Army. It depicts Ghost Army soldiers performing their various roles, transmitting deceptive radio signals, sewing and checking equipment, moving inflatable tanks. The medal is 3 inches in diameter and made of gold, worth approximately $30,000. One medal is struck and will eventually be displayed at the Smithsonian Institution. Bronze replicas are being made available to families of Ghost Army veterans. Bernard Bluestein, one of the 3 veterans present, speaks briefly. His words are simple and heartfelt. "You've all contributed to my existence and to my being who I am," he says, thanking those who worked for the Ghost Army's recognition. It is a moment of closure, of acknowledgement, coming 80 years late, but still meaningful. The Ghost Army Legacy Project, which Rick Beyer founded in 2016, continues its work beyond the Congressional Gold Medal. The organization has erected historical markers in Europe at sites where the Ghost Army operated, including one in Bettembourg, Luxembourg, and one at Plabanac, France, near the site of Operation Brest. The project maintains an extensive website with histories, photographs, documents, and profiles of hundreds of Ghost Army soldiers. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans developed a major traveling exhibition titled Ghost Army, the Combat Con Artists of World War II. The exhibition includes actual artifacts from the unit, artwork created by Ghost Army soldiers' uniforms, one of the few surviving inflatable tanks, photographs, and interactive displays explaining the deception techniques. The exhibition has toured museums across the United States, educating tens of thousands of visitors about the Ghost Army's remarkable story. In 2022, the Ghost Army Legacy Project and the National World War II Museum collaborated with the United States Mint on the design of the Congressional Gold Medal. The process involved consulting with Ghost Army families, historians, and military experts to create a design that accurately represents the unit's multifaceted mission. The resulting medal captures the visual, sonic, and radio deception elements that made the Ghost Army unique. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops and the 3153rd Signal Service Company, which conducted similar operations in Italy, were designated honorary members of the U.S. Army Psychological Operations Regiment on November 3, 2022. This recognition acknowledges that modern psychological and information operations trace their lineage to the Ghost Army's pioneering work. While no active Army unit maintains formal lineage from the 23rd, The influence of their methods continues in contemporary military doctrine. The recognition extends beyond official honors. Books continue to be published about the Ghost Army. Academic researchers study their operations as case studies in military deception and psychological warfare. Documentary filmmakers produce new works exploring different aspects of their story. And the Ghost Army has entered popular culture, appearing in references in video games, television shows, and other media. For the surviving veterans and their families, the recognition represents validation. For more than 50 years, these men could not talk about their service. They could not take pride in their achievements publicly. They watched other units receive medals, honors, and recognition while the Ghost Army remained in the shadows. Now, finally, their story is known. Their contributions are acknowledged. Their service is honored, but the recognition also comes with reflection on what was lost. How many Ghost Army veterans died without ever telling their families what they did? How many children of Ghost Army soldiers grew up believing their fathers had unremarkable military service, only to learn after their deaths that they had been part of something extraordinary? How many friendships and connections were never made because Ghost Army veterans could not identify themselves to each other in public settings? The secrecy, necessary at the time and understandable given the Cold War context, nevertheless extracted a price. These men saved thousands of lives. They pioneered new forms of warfare. They demonstrated that creativity and intelligence could be as powerful as weapons and armor, and they had to keep it secret for half a century, while other veterans received the recognition they deserved. Now, at least, the silence has ended. The Ghost Army's story is known. Their achievements are documented, their legacy is secure, and the few surviving veterans can finally speak openly about what they did during the war. After 80 years, the ghosts have become real, visible, and honored. Part 11, The Art of War, Legacy and Impact. The Ghost Army's influence extends far beyond their specific operations during World War II. The techniques they developed, the doctrine they established, and the proof of concept they provided have shaped military thinking about deception, psychological operations, and information warfare for 8 decades. Modern military deception still employs many of the same principles the Ghost Army pioneered. The integration of visual, auditory, and electromagnetic deception into coordinated operations remains fundamental to deception doctrine. The idea of a mobile, self-contained unit capable of staging tactical deceptions has been adopted and adapted by military forces around the world. The technology has evolved dramatically. Inflatable tanks have been replaced by more sophisticated decoys and radar simulators. Wire recorders have given way to digital audio systems with far greater fidelity and flexibility. Radio deception has become more complex with the advent of digital communications, computer networks, and satellite systems. But the underlying principles remain remarkably consistent with what the Ghost Army demonstrated. The sonic deception techniques developed by the 3132nd Signal Service Company influenced acoustic warfare in subsequent conflicts. During the First Gulf War in 1991, American forces used speaker systems to project deceptive sounds across the desert, influencing Iraqi troop movements and perceptions. The technology was far more advanced than the 500-pound speakers the Ghost Army used, but the concept was identical. Visual deception continues to play a role in modern warfare. Decoy equipment, ranging from simple camouflage to sophisticated radar reflectors that simulate aircraft or missiles, descends directly from the inflatable tanks and dummy artillery of the Ghost Army. Military forces around the world maintain stockpiles of such decoys and train in their deployment. The Ghost Army's emphasis on multimedia, coordinated deception has particularly influenced modern information operations. Contemporary military doctrine recognizes that effective deception requires integration across multiple domains: visual, acoustic, electromagnetic, cyber, and even social media. The Ghost Army pioneered this integrated approach, demonstrating that deception works best when it engages multiple senses and sources of information simultaneously. The psychological aspects of the Ghost Army's work have also proved influential. The unit demonstrated that deception is not just about fooling enemy sensors or intelligence gathering. It is about shaping enemy perceptions, influencing enemy decision-making, and creating uncertainty in enemy commanders' minds. Modern psychological operations and information warfare draw heavily on these insights. Perhaps most significantly, the Ghost Army proved that creativity and unconventional thinking have a place in military operations. The conventional military mindset often privileges kinetic solutions: more firepower, better armor, superior numbers. The Ghost Army showed that sometimes the best military solution is not to fight harder, but to fight smarter, to achieve strategic effects through deception rather than destruction. This lesson has been internalized to varying degrees by military organizations around the world. Special operations forces, intelligence agencies, and specialized units continue to develop creative, unconventional approaches to military problems. The Ghost Army serves as a historical example that validates this kind of thinking, demonstrating that unconventional methods can achieve significant strategic results. The Ghost Army's story has also had broader cultural impact. It challenges common perceptions about what military service looks like. When people think of World War II heroes, they typically imagine infantry soldiers storming beaches, fighter pilots engaging in dogfights, or tank crews in armored battles. The Ghost Army represents a different kind of courage and contribution, using art and creativity to save lives. Accepting danger not through combat, but through deception. This expands our understanding of how wars are won and who contributes to victory. The Ghost Army included artists who had never expected to be soldiers, designers who found themselves in combat zones, and creative individuals who discovered that their talents could serve military purposes. Their story suggests that contributions to military success come from unexpected places, and that different kinds of skills can be weaponized in different ways. For the art world, the Ghost Army has become a fascinating footnote in the biographies of several important artists. Ellsworth Kelly's time in the unit is now discussed in art historical literature. Scholars have noted how his exposure to camouflage techniques and visual deception may have influenced his later abstract work. Bill Blass's wartime service is mentioned in fashion history. The Ghost Army has become part of these artists' stories, adding an unexpected dimension to their creative development. The educational impact of the Ghost Army story has been significant. The unit has become a popular subject for history projects, particularly for students participating in National History Day competitions. Multiple student projects about the Ghost Army have won national awards. Teachers use the Ghost Army as a case study in creative problem solving, in the ethics of deception, and in the intersection of art and war. Museums and exhibitions have brought the Ghost Army story to millions of people. The traveling exhibition developed by the National World War II Museum has visited dozens of cities, introducing local audiences to this unique unit. The exhibition includes actual artifacts, artwork created by Ghost Army soldiers, examples of their equipment and techniques, and interactive displays that let visitors experience aspects of the deceptions. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans maintains a permanent collection of Ghost Army materials. The Ghost Army Legacy Project has donated thousands of items to this collection. Photographs, documents, artwork, letters, diaries, and other materials that document the unit's history. Researchers can access these materials, ensuring that the Ghost Army's story will continue to be studied and understood. Fort Drum, formerly Pine Camp, where the sonic deception units trained, has incorporated the Ghost Army into its own institutional history. The 10th Mountain Division and Fort Drum Museum includes exhibits about the Army Experimental Station and the sonic deception training that took place there. Historical markers acknowledge this important piece of the installation's past. The Ghost Army has also entered popular culture in various ways. Video games depicting World War II have included references to deception operations inspired by the Ghost Army. Television documentaries continue to be produced about the unit. Books for various age levels tell the Ghost Army story, from children's books introducing young readers to the concept to academic histories, analyzing their operations in detail. The Congressional Gold Medal represents the culmination of official recognition, but the Ghost Army's legacy extends beyond formal honors. The unit has become symbolic of a particular approach to warfare, of the value of creativity in military operations, and of the idea that sometimes the best weapon is not the one that destroys, but the one that deceives. Secretary of the Army Christine Wormuth, speaking at the Congressional Gold Medal ceremony in 2024, explicitly acknowledged this continuing legacy. Even though technology has changed quite a bit since 1944, she noted, our modern techniques build on a lot of what the Ghost Army did, and we are still learning from your legacy. This is perhaps the most important aspect of the Ghost Army's legacy. They remain relevant. 8 decades after their operations, military planners still study their techniques. Doctrine writers still reference their methods. And innovators in military operations still look to the Ghost Army as an example of what can be achieved through creative thinking and unconventional approaches. The Ghost Army demonstrated that in warfare, as in art, creativity matters. They showed that imagination can save lives. They proved that deception, when executed with skill and coordination, can achieve strategic effects that would require vastly larger forces using conventional methods. And they did all of this while remaining silent about their achievements for more than half a century. Now that their story is known, now that their achievements are documented and honored, the Ghost Army stands as a permanent example of military excellence achieved through unconventional means. They are a reminder that wars are won not just through strength and courage, though these are essential, but also through intelligence, creativity, and the willingness to think differently about how to solve military problems. The 1,100 men of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops and the 3133rd Signal Service Company created something unique in military history. They built an army of illusions that fooled one of the most professional military forces in the world. They staged more than 20 major deceptions across Europe. They saved between 15,000 and 30,000 American lives, and they proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon is the one the enemy never sees coming, because it does not exist at all. Closing, shadows, and light. Tonight we have traveled through a story that remained hidden for more than half a century. A story of creativity and deception, of courage and silence. We have seen how 1,100 men, most of them artists and designers rather than professional soldiers, created an illusion so convincing that it helped win a war. We have watched rubber tanks draw German fire while real soldiers advanced elsewhere. We have heard the sounds of phantom armies broadcast across the Rhine. We have witnessed the birth, evolution, and ultimate triumph of military deception on a scale never before attempted. The Ghost Army saved lives through imagination. They achieved victory through creativity. They fought with paintbrushes and sound effects, with rubber and radio waves, with talent and nerve, and an absolute commitment to selling lies so convincingly that the enemy never doubted them. And when the war ended, they returned to civilian life carrying a secret they could not share, bound by oaths of silence that would last for decades. 3 men died serving in the Ghost Army. Dozens more were wounded. All of them accepted the risk that comes with deliberately drawing enemy attention, with making themselves targets so that others could advance more safely. They demonstrated a particular kind of courage, not the courage to charge into fire, though they did that too, but the courage to stand still while enemy artillery searched for them, knowing that their rubber tanks offered no protection. The men who returned home went on to remarkable careers. They became fashion designers and famous artists, photographers and illustrators, architects and museum designers. They took the creative skills that had served their country at war and applied them to building culture and beauty in peacetime. But for 50 years, they could not talk about the most remarkable thing they had done. They could not point to their service and say, "I helped save thousands of lives. I was part of something extraordinary." Families grew up not knowing. Children became adults, never understanding what their fathers had accomplished. Wives lived with husbands who could not fully explain their wartime experiences. And men who had created armies out of air remained invisible, ghosts even in peace. When the story finally emerged, when declassification allowed the truth to be told, many of the men were already gone. They had kept faith with their oath of secrecy, maintaining silence even unto death. But their story survived. The documents remained. The artwork endured, and the few survivors could finally speak. Here is something to consider. This story nearly vanished entirely. If not for a handful of dedicated researchers, if not for children and grandchildren who insisted their loved ones deserved recognition, if not for the declassification in 1996, the Ghost Army might have become a forgotten footnote, a classified file gathering dust, The men would have died, the documents would have remained sealed, and one of the most extraordinary military operations in history would have been lost. We came that close to never knowing that 1,100 artists saved 30,000 soldiers' lives by painting rubber tanks and playing sounds through speakers. We almost lost the story of how creativity defeated the Wehrmacht. History could have forgotten the Ghost Army entirely, relegating them to the same limbo they inhabited during the war. Present, but invisible, effective but unknown, real, but ghost-like even in the historical record. The Congressional Gold Medal, presented in 2024 to 3 centenarians representing 1,100 brothers in arms, marked the end of the silence. The nation finally acknowledged what these men accomplished. Their families finally understood, and history finally recorded that in the great struggle against tyranny, creativity and deception played a vital role alongside courage and strength. The Ghost Army reminds us that warfare is not just about who has more tanks or better weapons. It is also about who thinks more creatively, who understands human psychology better, who can convince an enemy to believe what is not true. The Ghost Army proved that imagination can be weaponized, that art can save lives, and that sometimes the best way to win is to make the enemy fight an army that exists only in their minds. Their legacy continues. Military forces around the world still employ deception. The techniques evolve, the technology advances, but the fundamental principles remain rooted in what the Ghost Army pioneered 8 decades ago. Every time a military force uses decoys to draw enemy fire away from real troops, every time sonic deception influences enemy perception, every time coordinated multimedia deception achieves strategic effects, the Ghost Army's influence lives on. And beyond the military legacy, there is the human story. The story of young men, many barely out of art school, who found themselves asked to serve their country in an unconventional way. The story of creativity channeled into military purposes. The story of secrets kept and eventually revealed. The story of recognition delayed but finally granted. The story of lives saved by ingenuity rather than firepower. The Ghost Army began as an experiment, an untested concept inspired by British success in North Africa. They could have failed. Their deceptions could have been discovered and exposed, accomplishing nothing, or worse, alerting the enemy to Allied deception efforts more broadly. But they did not fail. They succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. They became, in the words of a U.S. Army analyst, a group of few men who had great influence on the outcome of major military campaigns. Tonight, as we reach the end of this story, we remember not just the operations and the techniques, but the men themselves. Bill Blass sewing patches onto uniforms in a French dugout. Ellsworth Kelly painting inflatable tanks to look like real armor. Jack Macy running sonic programs within range of German artillery. Robert Tompkins keeping his prohibited diary. Arthur Singer sketching between operations. 379 artists of the 603rd Engineer Camouflage Battalion creating visual illusions. The radio operators of the Signal Company Special perfecting their imitations. The sonic specialists of the 332nd broadcasting their phantom armies. The engineers of the 406th providing security and support. They were the Ghost Army. They created armies that did not exist. They fought with creativity and deception. They saved thousands of lives. And for more than 50 years, they remained silent about their extraordinary service. Now, their story is known, their achievements are documented, their service is honored, and their legacy endures, reminding us that in warfare, as in art, imagination matters, creativity has power, and sometimes the most effective weapon is the one that exists only in the enemy's mind. If you have enjoyed learning about the Ghost Army and their remarkable story, please consider subscribing to this channel and sharing this video with others who appreciate history told with care and detail. The stories of World War II continue to teach us, inspire us, and remind us of what humans can accomplish when they combine courage with creativity. Until next time, rest well, knowing that even the darkest chapters of history contain stories of light, ingenuity, and the triumph of human imagination.